When I began my breastfeeding journey with Avery, I never knew that I would actually enjoy it, and I definitely didn't know how divisive the topic was. So I wanted to share my experience and why so many people get very upset when you talk about breastfeeding. I'm Juli, Bauer, Roth, the food, fitness, and lifestyle blogger behind PaleOMG. Welcome to my channel. I'm here to share my favorite food, workout, and wellness tips to help you live your best damn life. And today we're talking boobs. We're talking breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is such an interesting thing because before I had Avery, when I just thought about having a child, I wasn't even pregnant. When I simply thought about having a child, I did not want to breastfeed. It sounded miserable. I don't know why, but I just didn't think I would want to do that in any capacity. But once I got pregnant, everything changed. That's when I decided I wanted to give birth at a birth center because I didn't want a hospital experience. And that's when I decided I definitely wanted to breastfeed. And luckily my birth center had amazing resources to help me really accomplish that goal. But something I noticed was when I started talking about breastfeeding on social media, I got so much hate for talking about it. And I was simply sharing how proud I was for sticking with it, how excited I was that I actually enjoyed it, how challenging it was. I talked about all these different things, and I would get hate from people saying, you know, you are not any better just because you breastfeed. And I was like, wait, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about my own personal experience, because I'm really glad that I stuck with it long term, and I want to share that in case that inspires somebody else to stick it with it if they are thinking about not doing it anymore, but they want to stick with it. I just wanted to share my own story. So I wanted to do a video all about my own breastfeeding experience, but then also talk about the different benefits, because not everybody has the same resources at the birth center that I had. I had a ton of classes where I learned about the benefits. I learned about how to latch properly with your baby, how to position them. I learned about so many different things. So I wanted to share some of the things that I learned. First up, there are a ton of different benefits for the baby and the mom when it comes to breastfeeding. Some of the benefits for baby include, well, it's obviously the ideal nutrition for a baby. The mom was made to create this milk for their child, so it is the ideal nutrition. Obviously, we can get into some caveats later. Babies who are breastfed are at lower risk of diabetes, obesity, asthma, and SIDS. Breast milk contains antibodies, so say when a mom gets sick, she's going to create these antibodies and then they're transferred through the breast milk, and this is going to help the baby be less vulnerable to viruses and different diseases. Breastfed babies are less likely to experience ear infections, respiratory infections, gut infections, allergies, and more. Now, this is one that will actually upset people, but there's a study, and this isn't strong evidence, but this study indicates that breastfed babies actually have higher intelligence scores and are less likely to have behavioral issues and learning difficulties as they grow. Don't worry, I'll link that study below if you want to check it out. So obviously there's a ton of different benefits for the baby, as we know, but there are benefits to mom as well. Since producing milk takes energy to produce this milk, you're gonna burn about 300 to 500 extra calories a day. So this may help with postpartum weight loss if that is your goal. Not all women experience this. Everybody's body is a little bit different, but it can definitely help burn extra calories and lose some of that weight postpartum. Breastfeeding actually contracts the uterus. And so when you breastfeed, your uterus begins to contract, and then it brings it back down to size before you had your baby, which expands it to a very large size. Mothers who breastfeed have a lower risk of depression, and breastfeeding reduces your risk of many different things, such as high blood pressure, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and even breast cancer. Another benefit, as we all know, it's cheaper. You are producing your milk for free. Well, not exactly, because you have to eat and drink enough to produce this breast milk, but your body will take whatever it needs to produce it. So it's much cheaper than the alternative formula. And it can build a really strong connection to the mom and the baby, which benefits both mom and baby here. But as we know, all these benefits, there are many things that women struggle with breastfeeding. So many different things can happen, and many of those things can deter women from sticking with breastfeeding long term. Some of those struggles can include sore and painful nipples, clogged ducts, mastitis, engorgement, failure to latch with their baby, tongue ties, resentment from their partner since their partner doesn't have to do maybe the overnight feedings, loss in social activity, activities, and that can range from just going out with friends when you need to be home and feeding your baby and maybe you don't have time to pump and so you have to say, sorry, I can't make it, to maybe you want to go out and have a couple drinks and you can't make that happen depending if you're not pumping or you just can't pump in time. Many different things that can reduce that social quality time that so many women crave, especially after babies. Plus, it's incredibly time consuming. Then you add work on top of it, even harder. And then so many women have a lack of support. They don't have people to talk to through their struggles, through their issues that they're going through. The lack of support is a really hard one. Now, why is breastfeeding so divisive? Why is there so much stigma around it? Because when I started talking so openly about it, it didn't cross my mind that it would upset people. But something I always hear in the back of my head is Brené Brown, who talked about why women get so upset about parenting when a parent does something different than another parent. So if you have a friend who's saying she did something completely different, it might make you feel like you did something wrong because you didn't do the exact same thing. And so it all comes down to shame. Obviously, if you know Brené Brown, she is big into shame. And we feel this shame of not doing our best when all we want to do is our best for our child. And so that's what it comes down to. When these people are getting upset with me sharing my experience, maybe they are going through some sort of shame. But there are so many different reasons why a woman wouldn't breastfeed. Number one, maybe they don't want to. Maybe, and this isn't ranked up there, but maybe the person simply does not want to breastfeed. And that makes sense. Do whatever you need to do. All those things I listed before, those are hard things to battle through, especially postpartum. But women can experience all kinds of things like low milk supply, whether their diet isn't working for them or they're just not producing the amount of milk that their baby needs. Medication may keep their child from breastfeeding. Maybe they're on medication that could be transferred through the breast milk and so they can't breastfeed. Baby may be allergic to milk. That happened to a woman in my birth center group. It happened to a friend. Their milk was not working for their baby and they were having an allergic reaction to it and they moved to formula. Then on top of women having to do so much for their child, take care of their child, take care of their household, take care of their spouse, just like we would hope they would do for us, then they're working on top of it. And pumping, I can't imagine amazing, amazing moms out there who are pumping and breastfeeding and doing it all while working full time is beyond me. But there are so many different facets that can restrict women from breastfeeding, whether they don't want to or their life is too busy or their milk supply isn't working. There are so many moving parts. And I think that women feel shame about that, whether they feel shame for not wanting to, whether they feel shame for not being able to. There's so much shame around parenting and it just pulls people apart. And I saw this immediately from sharing about breastfeeding and continuing to push through and trying my best with it. I saw this anger that really is rooted in shame at the end of the day. And my friends who simply decided to not breastfeed could have cared less about me breastfeeding because they didn't have any shame around it. So it's really interesting when you look at the divisiveness and the stigma around it, it really comes down to shame, feeling like you are not doing the best for your child, and that's all we want to do. And there are so many different ways to do that. There's not just one way to do that. Now, if you're thinking about breastfeeding and you don't really know where to turn, at your hospital, they should have a lactation consultant that you can talk to. And lactation consultants can help you with so much, from checking out tongue ties to looking at the latch, seeing if you're positioning them correctly, if you are helping them latch in the best way possible. They can help with so much. And then if your baby is running into issues, maybe tongue ties, there are many different body workers. There are revision surgeries depending on what route you want to go down, and there are different ways to help your baby be better at breastfeeding and so you are more comfortable long term. And at the end of the day, there's so many other things too. I'm in a group with my birth center women who gave birth around the same time as me, and we chat all the time on our little WhatsApp thread, and everyone's doing things different. Some are doing formula, some are pumping and then feeding, some are like me and just breastfeeding. Everybody is completely different, and all of us are completely supportive in that group because we want that person to feel their best with their child. So if you're doing formula, if you're doing breast milk, if you're doing pump, whatever, Everybody's different. Now, when it came down to my own experience, I went in knowing that breastfeeding would be hard because that is literally the only thing people told me about. They're like, you think pregnancy's hard? Wait till you breastfeed. And let me tell you, I thought pregnancy was way harder than breastfeeding, and breastfeeding was not easy. It was not easy for me. It wasn't perfect in any capacity, but 9 to 10 months was much more uncomfortable than how long it took to get comfortable with breastfeeding. So everyone's experience is different, okay? So don't just vomit your experience onto everybody because they might have something different. But for my own experience, I went in knowing that it would be challenging and that I would have classes ahead of time. I would have everything that I needed to feel prepared for this. And I had lactation consultants that I could talk to, multiple, depending on the area. I just knew many from living here for so long. But I went in knowing if it didn't work for us, I would turn to formula. And I really went in thinking, okay, if I have to turn to formula, I'm going to make my own formula. That was really my goal because I had known friends who had done that. But the biggest thing was I was open to whatever needed to happen for me and for our daughter. So after I gave birth, when I gave birth in a birth center, and I know hospitals and everywhere is completely different, but they are just huge on the baby latching immediately. So I gave birth in a tub. I got out of the tub, laid down, and then as they were doing whatever they needed to do with down below, they had her latch and she latched immediately. Then once we got home, you know, the real stuff begins, and pretty quickly they start cluster feeding where they're feeding every 15 minutes. And this is when shit was not fun. I remember sitting in bed in the evening. It was, you know, middle of the night. I'm crying. Avery's crying. I'm trying to get her to latch. I can't get her to latch. It's just so hard. I don't know how to do it. She seems uncomfortable. And Brian looks at me and he's like, do you think we should just go to formula? You seem miserable. And I'm like, no, it takes a while. This is going to take some time. We're going to push through this and continue on for a bit. I'm going to at least give it 6 weeks before I throw in the towel. So quickly, it was very painful, and it felt like it was more painful than it should be. And I started watching after she would feed, when she would let go of my nipple was completely white and it felt like my boobs were on fire. And it wasn't this burning feeling that you can get when your milk is letting down. It was fire. And I started looking things up and I found out that's vasospasms that are happening in your nipple. And so what I decided to do pretty quickly, thanks to our doula's recommendation, is pumping during the day, giving milk for Brian to feed her for at least 4 hours, and then I would feed her after that. But I got this 4 to 5 hour break where my boobs did not have to be touched and my nipples could get some rest. And that was huge. And I used all kinds of different things. I used silverettes, which are wonderful when your boobs are super tender at the beginning, because there are these little discs and they sit really high. Like you look like you have giant, really thick nipples, but you can put those on top of your nipples and then they don't rub on your bra, they don't rub on your shirt, anything like that. So it just gives them kind of a barrier, a protective barrier. I also tried the cooling pads, I tried the heating pads, I tried nipple cream. Nipple cream didn't do shit. Like, I'm like, that was such a waste of money. I didn't experience anything from that. But those silverettes really did help with just giving me a protective barrier for a little bit. Experiencing the vasospasms was the hardest part because I thought I would have this forever. There was really no end in sight. Whenever I looked at anything online, they were like, yeah, it just happens and you just put heat on them and keep them warm. I was like, okay, well, that's not realistic. I live in Colorado and I can't just keep them warm at all times, but they did get better and better. So the biggest thing I heard was getting to that 6 to 8 week mark. That's when things improve so much. And it was completely the case for me. And something I didn't even point out was when it was really painful at the beginning, everybody was like, she has a tongue tie, she has a tongue tie, she has a tongue tie. I'm like, no, she doesn't. I've had 4 lactation consultants check and she does not have a tongue tie. She has no issues. This is literally my body just getting used to this, and it just takes time. And some people, it's really easy, and some people it's not. And I feel like I was right in the middle. It wasn't easy. It wasn't the crazy hardest thing ever, but it was not enjoyable. I didn't love it at first, but I loved that I was feeding my child. So I continued to stick with it, and I got to that 6 to 8 week mark, and truly, a complete corner was turned. It's like you create these calluses on your nipples, even though your nipples aren't calloused over, I promise. It's like you have created that because it doesn't hurt anymore, depending on your child. And I had no issues anymore. Now it feels like a freaking taffy pull. I just think of that literally every time, a taffy pull. She's pulling away on it and there's no issues with it. But the coolest part is I get to look down at her and we get to make this beautiful eye contact that I will never forget. Those moments are so special to me. And when I'm up with her all through the night, it's so not fun sometimes, depending on what stage of life she's going through and if she's going through a sleep regression. But I'll always have those moments that are so sacred to me. And as I move forward through life and I'm no longer breastfeeding her, whenever that day comes, I will always have those memories and that connection of looking into her eyes and knowing that I am there for her. I am her food source. I am her comfort, because it's not only food. Babies use our breasts for comfort as well. And to know that I can be her comfort whenever she feels stressed or sad or upset, I can be there for her. And that is so cool. That is something a man cannot experience in the same capacity. And I feel so lucky and so #blessed I know that was annoying, to be able to be there for her and be some sort of nutrition and comfort at the same time. That is what's beautiful to me. And I know that triggers some people who have decided to not breastfeed or can't breastfeed or whatever, but that's just my own personal experience. And I know some people who did not enjoy breastfeeding at all and they stuck with it for a year or so. Like, everybody is so different, but for me, I have loved it, and I'm so glad I stuck with it past that 6 to 8 week mark, because it's completely different now. I breastfeed in public really comfortably. I know that I can be her food source at any time. Like when we just went to Cabo for her first trip, I was able to breastfeed her on the plane. I don't have to get a bottle out. Like, it is just so easy and so wonderful, and I love it. I really do love it. And I did not love it at first, in any capacity. And luckily I had a best friend I talked to throughout the process who was 6 weeks ahead of me with her baby. So we could talk about all these different things and have support of each other. But know that it can feel challenging and it can be really hard, and your experience is going to be different than anybody else's. But from my own personal experience, I'm really glad I stuck with it and at least tried for that 6 to 8 weeks. And if it didn't work, or if she had a really hard latch or a tongue tie, I would have been different, but it worked out great for me. And I like sharing that because there is a lot of negativity that I've seen around breastfeeding, and I don't have that experience. It was hard. It was challenging. I cried. I was in a lot of pain sometimes, and then it was gone. And now I have this incredibly growing, beautiful baby who I get to connect with every single day, every 3 to 4 hours. It's awesome. So I just wanted to share that. But please remember, if you're one of these people who didn't want to breastfeed, who couldn't breastfeed, if there was some sort of issue you tried and couldn't, and you feel anger when someone talks about breastfeeding in a positive way, remember, you don't need to feel that way. Everybody's journey is completely different. There needs to be no divisiveness, no stigma around someone breastfeeding versus not breastfeeding. That is their own choice, their own experience. And let's support anybody in how they're taking care of their child when they're doing it in the best way they can. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Anyways, I think it's time to feed her. I should get going. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned. I have a few more videos coming up I think you're gonna like. And don't forget to drink your milk.